Welcome to episode 8 of Real Health Radio.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hi guys, Chris Sandel here, and welcome to the show. Today's show is another interview, and it's an interview with Josh and Jeanne Rubin. Josh and Jeanne are revolutionizing nutrition for thyroid health by teaching people how to use food as supplements, reduce stress, and build the most sound foundation for the body to heal. They believe the greatest defense one has against the ever-changing environment is the health of your metabolism. When the metabolism is strong, the thyroid is functioning, all systems are working in synergy just as they're meant to be. Josh and Jeanne are teaching people how to use food to resurface their body in new ways, which in turn is building a bridge for complete mind, body, and spirit growth and transformation. You can find out more details at www.eastwesthealing.com. I became exposed to Josh and Jeanne back in about 2009, 2010. In the early days, Josh was really the face of East West Healing and Jeanne was definitely in the background. And I found Josh, he has a YouTube channel, he's been doing that for a really long time. And it was around 2009, 2010 that I started to watch that kind of occasionally. And it was probably more in about 2012 that I started watching it much more religiously. It was in that year that they then released a training program called the Metabolic Blueprint that I took, and I found it absolutely invaluable. It's had a huge influence on me and how I practice. And I use lots of the stuff that I've learned with most of my clients to this day. And it was also in 2012 that my girlfriend became very ill. She was starting to have real crashes in her energy, was having issues with her cycle, just started to really struggle. She's someone who really was, at the time, was always going out, had a very active social life, so it wasn't like her to be tired and not wanting to get up. She then started to get lots of dizziness where she'd have real difficulties standing or walking, and she'd have some time off work, it would get a little better, then it would come back and it would be worse, and this was just going on, and we had lots of doctor's appointments and blood tests, and really nothing was helping solve the issue. So I suggested that she have a chat with Jeanne. I have a rule of not working with any friends and any family because I think it can get messy. I don't always think there's the right level of boundaries. And so I said, look, why don't you speak to Jeanne? Because I especially didn't want to be the nutritionist of my partner who I was living with, who was also not very well. So Ali and Jeanne had a chat and they got on really well and they decided to work together. And in 6 months, she went from barely making it out of bed in the morning just to get to work to getting up at the crack of dawn so that she could go horse riding before going to work. And I'm not saying it wasn't tough. It definitely was. But if I look at the changes that took place within 6 months, it was enormous. So it's my real pleasure to have Josh and Jeanne on the show today. We talk about thyroid health and metabolism. We look at stress and how this impacts on things. We chat a little about Ray Peat, who's someone who's had a real big influence on all of us. We look at how to use food first instead of supplements to support the body. And this is something that they really demonstrated to me through their program. So I'm really happy to have them on the show. I hope you enjoy it today. So, hi, Josh and Jeanne. Welcome to the show. Kind of really excited to have you here today.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And to start with, why don't you just tell people who don't know who you are, just a bit about your background and how you found your way into the health field?
Well, I'll make it as short and sweet as I can. Pretty much grew up in a quote-unquote healthy household back then. You know, we didn't really have Coke or Pop-Tarts or any of that stuff. You know, my mother always cooked. You know, it wasn't maybe organic, but it was healthy food. We always, didn't eat many sandwiches. It was always like a sit-down meal. You know, my whole family was in the health industry.
Okay.
So I grew up, bodybuilding, eating healthy per se, and ended up going to school for occupational therapy. I'll make it short. And kind of through that, started working in the OT field and found that anyone could really do my job with what insurance companies limited you to. And I was still bodybuilding, so I started to personal train, do the whole NASM, NSCA, all the check stuff, and really got involved in the check stuff and taught for them. And long story short, just kind of studied and read on my own and really became passionate about studying the function of the body instead of disease, because that's what most people are studying. So I really got in tune with anatomy and physiology, and through that, in 2004 maybe, found Ray's work and kept studying functional physiology, and from there just developed our business to where we are today, which is helping people understand the function of the body, and how to use food to heal instead of studying dysfunction and trying to use supplements to heal.
Right. And what about yourself, Jeannie? Did you have the same kind of healthy start?
Not at all. Not even close. I, came into this work through a very personal journey of my own. Looking back on it now, I can say that I definitely came into this world in a very deficient, maybe, hypothyroid state, I guess you can say. And with that and all of its lovely symptoms, I kind of struggled throughout my entire life and was really kind of searching for, what it was. And for most of the beginning of my life, up until my 20s, early 20s, it was kind of like, well, that's how the women in our family are. And that's, not uncommon. And what I knew that it was for me, something wasn't right. So it just kind of motivated me to seek it out. And for whatever reasons, I've always been in tune with the wholeness of the body. So it was always what I was looking for, is something that could, help me understand that in a new way. And that's actually how Josh and I met, was through the Czech Institute and studying nutrition through there. And then from there, it just kind of spiraled into, studying deeper into nutrition, physiology, very similar story from that point forward. But it took me moving completely away from my normal lifestyle and into a lifestyle of, island living, I guess you can say, that really began to shift how I experienced myself and my body. And from that point forward, I knew that it didn't have to be that way. And that's when I kind of started the journey. Yeah, so it's very different.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess you were able to then take some of those experiences from not being so healthy to start with, that you can then be using with your clients as well.
Oh, 100%. I relate to my clients 100%. And I've been on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And again, just understanding the process of healing, and that, we as a society expect things to happen overnight, but we don't realize that these are very accumulative processes that are going on in the body, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time, but what we're doing here is really helping people to establish a foundation based on who they are and an understanding and relationship with themselves, so that they can, honor that and create that in their lives. So it's a big piece, so that they can, again, continue to meet their body where it is and give it the support it needs to continue that healing process. Because it's lifelong,
Totally. And I kind of find that people can have stuff that are going on for years and years or decades, and then their kind of expectation is that, well, I followed something for a month, like, why aren't I better yet? And there's this real kind of disparity between sort of the amount of time someone expects it takes them to heal versus the amount of time it's taken them to actually get to that point of sort of dishealth.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a societal thing. You have chiropractors, naturopaths, all these people. I'm going to crack you, you're going to feel better. I'm going to give you a supplement, you're going to feel better. So they expect to follow this nutrition plan for a month. Like, I have a client, and she's like, well, my eyes aren't getting better. I'm like, well, you have a degenerative disease. Like, it's going to help support you, but if you think in a month food's going to heal your eyes at 65 years old, it's not going to happen. But it's definitely going to support everything else you're doing. And yeah, most people think that, like you said, in a month they're going to be better. And unfortunately, our goal is to teach people, when working with them, a philosophy that they can use to heal themselves. We're not going to say in 6 months you're going to heal, because if you're 53, it took you 53 plus years to get like this. It's not going to take 6 months to unwind that, chaos per se.
Yeah.
Well, I think with the depth in which we're working too, where this is not a superficial process, as you know, Chris, we're working, at that deepest level where the entire body has to adapt into the changes that, are being made. They're very chemical reactions, that are shifting in the body. So we have to give it space and time. But again, I know we're going to talk more about this, but putting people directly in relationship with their physiology through the assessments that we use, it gives them opportunity to understand it in a different way and to see it with their own two eyes, because we're so detached with what stress feels like in our body.
Yes. And so you guys kind of really specialize in sort of thyroid health, and metabolism is kind of really integral to this. And I want to talk about sort of thyroid in a minute, but let's start with metabolism. I personally think it's a term that most people don't really understand properly. And people talk about it as kind of the rate that you burn calories or kind of little sound bites, but it's much deeper than this. And so can you explain from your perspective sort of what cellular metabolism is really about and why it's so important to health?
Well, the complexity of what we do, which most people can't connect to, that's why we don't market it like this, is we're really trying to teach the body how to store glycogen in the liver and the muscles to convert thyroid hormone, because you need it, which is T4 to T3. So your cells can use glycogen and T3 as well as minerals, but to basically produce energy, which is CO2, ATP, and water.
And the foundation of all of that is your food.
So we can't really say that to most people because they're like, what are you talking about? Yeah. So we say thyroid because most people can connect to that, even though we're not directly working with the thyroid per se, because we're dealing more with the storage and conversion of the thyroid hormone, which, as I mentioned, over 80% peripherally is converted in the liver, and other organs. But that's kind of what we do. And what metabolism means is, to us, it's all the biochemical, physiological reactions in the body. And if you think about it, and Broda Barnes talked about this, you're basically a conglomeration of cells. I mean, you were brought into this world as an embryo, as a cell, and you multiply, whatever it is, 4, 18, 16 cells, and you keep multiplying, and you become an embryo and then a fetus. And every organ and skin and tissue and everything is comprised of cells, and every cell is affected by thyroid hormone. So if we can regulate the cell, which is the conductor of all the systems, meaning the GI system, immune system, hormone system, detox system, etc., we can regulate all the systems indirectly and allow the body to do what it's designed to do, which is create health. So we started to use one of Broda Barnes' assessment tools, which is body temperature and pulse. And in a nutshell, you're looking at other things, but in a nutshell, you're looking at how your body is converting glycogen and using T3 efficiently at the cell level. That's what you're really looking at.
And for someone who if I go back, for someone who doesn't know what glycogen is, can you just explain that?
It's basically the storage of sugar in the liver, and just to simplify it, because our body, when we exert energy, it needs fuel, just like a car needs gas. And when we're exerting energy, our body's primary source of that energy need is sugar, or glycogen, which is sugar. It can use other things like fructose, and a lot of people say it uses protein and fat, but it's very inefficient to produce energy. You use more resources than you produce when you use protein and fat. And when you use protein, that's called glyconeogenesis, and that's a catabolic state. That's like when we're not taking enough fuel and we go to run a marathon and our body breaks its tissues down. This is why marathon runners are thin. We're using proteins. It's catabolic. We don't want to use proteins primarily for energy. Fat, a lot of people think we want to use it for energy production. We can use it for energy production because it's got 9 calories per gram. The problem is we don't use it when we're needing to exert energy. We actually use it at rest in a very metabolic state, like maybe at night when we're sleeping, or we're just sitting and watching TV at night or in the morning. This is if we're metabolic. Our body actually uses fat for energy. It doesn't need that much glycogen because we're not exerting energy. But most of us are human. We live in this crazy world. We're going. And most people are not taking in the right foods, the right frequency of foods to regulate their blood sugar so we can store that glycogen so we can use it to produce energy, so we have enough fuel to fuel our engine so we can feel energized throughout the day. And we can see that through body temperature and pulse. So that's where the technicality is of what we're doing at the cell level. But what we're really doing is, to simplify it, we're putting enough fuel in your tank to get you through the day. That's really what we're doing. It's like, the way I explain it to clients is, your cells are like your furnace of your body. And if you just ate 1 or 2 meals a day and just threw a bunch of wood in that furnace, there's a risk that the fire would go out. But if you're constantly putting some kindling or wood on the fire every 2 to 3 hours, you're going to produce heat, the furnace is going to keep going, and you're going to heat the house, per se, throughout the day. And that's what blood sugar regulation is all about, is constantly putting fuel into the system to keep the furnace going, which is thyroid hormone, so you can produce energy, which is heat.
And so that's how, if we kind of shift to thyroid, like that's how then thyroid fits into this, and that's kind of thyroid's role in terms of metabolism?
Yeah, because your cells regulate all your systems, and thyroid hormone regulates the rate of the heartbeat, digestion, all these different things. I mean, it's
essential to ATP production at the mitochondria. So it's necessary in addition to oxygen.
Well, it's simple. Your body has 2 choices. It's either going to produce energy or produce inflammation. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. You produce ATP, CO2, and water, which is energy, or you produce lactic acid, which is inflammation. Right. It's really only 2 pathways. So the example I talk to clients a lot about, because most people have GI issues, and they're stressed and fatigued and rapid heart rate and whatever, they're in survival mode. They're essentially running from a lion all day. Most people are, because they're exerting more energy than you're taking in. And if you're running from a lion, are you thinking about digesting food? No, you're running from a lion. So what happens? Your body directs, different hormones away from the GI system to run from the lion, so you can see and think, etc. A lot of your digestive juices slow down, and this was shown by Hans Selye and other people like Dr. Timmons. So you get a decrease in 50% of your GI juices, like hydrochloric acid and pancreatic enzymes, etc. So of course you're going to have stomach problems, digestive problems. Are you thinking about going to the bathroom when you're running from a lion? No, because you're running from a lion, so you're going to be constipated. Are you thinking about procreating when you're running from a lion? No, because you're running from a lion, so you have hormone issues. So when you're exerting more than you're taking in, you're not regulating your blood sugar, you're not producing energy, you're producing lactic acid. So the cells are going to direct all the systems to slow down so you can run from a lion. But if you stop running from a lion and you take in more fuel to fuel the system, now you start producing energy, and that's going to upregulate the systems of the body, and you're going to increase digestion, hormone production, etc. And you're going to pull the body out of this survival mode and put it closer to a homeostatic state. Our body is designed to fight stress. The problem is most people are maybe in homeostasis for a short amount of time, and then they bounce out into the stress sympathetic state, but they never come back down to balance or homeostasis. They're always in that state. And our goal is to get them closer to homeostasis or balance by using food, to regulate blood sugar and energy production.
And to reteach the body how to store glycogen. As Josh was talking about earlier, we have this primary energy system, and we also have these backup reserves because the body knows how important that glucose is. So when we become deficient or whatnot, it begins to tap into those alternative systems. And again, necessary for our survival, but not intended for long-term purposes. So over time, again, because the body adapts, it adapts into those dysfunctional energy-producing mechanisms. And it's very, very difficult to get out of when it becomes chronic enough. And in that state, the body is in essentially a state of compensation. It has no choice but to be functioning on inflammatory hormones. And you can very effectively, through understanding where somebody is in their baseline, use food to intervene on those stressors. What we don't understand is when that body gets that chronic and the cycles get that vicious, unless we are paying specific attention to how to stop it, we are suppressing the very things that we need to heal. So if we don't get the body quiet enough, we're not going to be able to begin absorbing our nutrients. And in those chronic states, we become very deficient in all those different vitamins and minerals that we need because the body for so long has been stealing from Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
So again, understanding somebody, teaching them how to use food, we can begin to reteach the body how to store glycogen more efficiently in the liver so that when we have long periods, or not long periods, but periods within the day, in between meals, the body can more clearly communicate and send those messages of I need energy. Okay, well, here's a little bit of energy. Let's move on, regulate blood sugar levels, so on and so forth. And over time, again, it begins to adapt back into a normal physiological state.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Robert Sapolsky, which is, when there's a tornado bearing down on your house, it's not the day to repaint the garage. Right. And I think it's just a really good way of looking at the fact that, like, when you're in that stress state, your body just changes its priorities. It's not about long-term health. It's about short-term survival, which is kind of exactly what you guys have been saying there, that the body then needs to be kind of retaught how to shift its focus so that the focus does become long-term health as opposed to just how do we get out of harm's way.
Exactly.
And so if we're looking just a little bit more specifically at sort of thyroid hormones, things like TSH or T4 or T3, without kind of getting too technical, so sort of a layperson can understand, like, how are these things sort of produced in the body? How do they work? How do they kind of regulate metabolism and cellular energy production, etc.?
Josh?
Well, I mean, we don't focus too much on those things just because we're not doctors. And a lot of people come to us with labs, of course, and they want us to look at them. The problem is most people are just getting TSH tested, and they're not getting true hormone panels done with, like, TPO, TSH, T3, T4, free T3, free T4, RT3, and cholesterol, getting a full thyroid panel. For us, based on the work of Broda Barnes, getting a cholesterol tested is more of a marker for hypothyroidism than anything, because high cholesterol is actually an indicator of hypothyroidism, because your body uses cholesterol to basically, create all that conversion. And when you don't have enough T3, cholesterol just keeps building up and up and up. And of course, when you're in a stress state, you produce more cholesterol because it's a large antioxidant. But if you can't convert it, it's going to keep going up. And you need thyroid hormone to convert it. So cholesterol is a better marker than TSH. I mean, the lower the TSH, the better. But that doesn't mean you're going to be healthy. I work with tons of people that have perfect labs and they feel like crap.
Yeah.
So for us, body temperature and pulse is a way better indicator, because most people, we have a lot of clients all over the world. We've had for many, many years. And I would say that 90% of them have subclinical hypothyroidism, which to me is just chronic blood sugar dysregulation. Right. They don't have true thyroid issues. And we see this because when you have a true thyroid issue, you might wake up with a body temperature that's low, below 37 Celsius or 97.8. Let's say it's 96 degrees. And they work with us and they're really eating the right foods and frequencies. And over 3 months, their temperature is still 96 in the morning. It's 96 during the day. It never changes. That's usually a true thyroid issue. We rarely see that. I've seen that, honestly, maybe 5 times. And I'm talking like 12 years. Most people have chronic blood sugar dysregulation, where the adrenals are playing more of a role. Now, I'm not saying you have adrenal fatigue, because we don't really believe in that term, but it's more blood sugar dysregulation. You see it because their temperature and pulse go up and down throughout the day based on how they're living and what they're eating. And the problem with these labs is you do a lab, you see chaos, and of course, if you feel like you're living in chaos, if you do a lab, what are you going to see? Chaos. The problem is they take all these medications, and now their body's in a deficient state, and they don't have the resources to support these medications or supplements. And what happens? It actually pushes them over the edge, or it doesn't even help them at all. It's almost the equivalent I give my clients, if it makes sense to them. It's like they have an old rusty engine, and they install nitrous in their engine, and they hit the nitrous button when they're going down the highway 20 miles an hour. What's going to happen? The engine's going to blow up. And that's what happens. I talked to a lady last night, and it's like she had all these thyroid panels done, and, because she was 53 or 55, and she was 55, and doctor told her that she's probably in menopause and probably has low thyroid and probably has low estrogen and all these things, and did a lab, and of course she did, and put her on tons of thyroid, tons of DHEA, tons of hormones. And next thing you know, she's not sleeping, rapid heart rate, sweating. Her progesterone levels were like through the roof, like 4 times the amount you should have. Her DHEA levels were through the roof, and she felt even worse. And it's because the body doesn't have resources to utilize that stuff, convert that stuff appropriately. And from our standpoint, if someone is taking a medication, our goal isn't to say take it, stop it, or you should take a medication. We can't do that. Our goal is to use nutrition to support that, and 99% of the time, they're actually able to talk to their doctor about going off their medication sooner than later, because the food has supported them so much. So from our standpoint, we don't treat humans through labs and try to create perfect labs, because we've worked with too many people that have perfect labs and feel like crap. We use awareness, checking in with themselves throughout the day, their symptoms, body temperature and pulse, and our food logs to help people heal. Because, if you think about it, my experience is these labs are just nothing but negative feedback. Because even when they do come out perfect, it's almost like now that they wanted to walk and they're running, now they want to be able to sprint. It's never good enough, And either they find something else wrong or something else they want to test, or now it's when my labs are perfect and I don't feel good, so maybe I have, the whole MTHFR, whatever that thing is, or that, and it's like, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So for me personally, labs are a rabbit hole. Now,
I think they're good information.
I was going to say, like, they play a purpose, but we're not doctors. We do nutrition. And if someone wants to enter that rabbit hole, I'll say, find a doctor, not a functional medicine practitioner, unless they're a doctor, because I know this is harsh, but in our industry these days, there's way too many people playing doctor. And we need to really stick with what we're teaching people. And I think a lot of that playing doctor puts fear in people about what they have wrong with them. Oh, I have adrenal fatigue. Oh, I have a candida infection. Oh, I have SIBO. I'm going to make up something. And, those are just all made up. They're just made up. It's like.
Well, so, I think there's issues, but again, we are really trying to move out of this idea of spot fixing the body. You can't do it. It's really about looking at how all these systems are communicating. And when going back to thyroid is a main player in that piece. It's, again, part of that cellular metabolism that is, as Josh said earlier, conducting how that body is in communication with itself. So when we talk about TSH levels in T4 and T3, those are very specific messages being sent to the hypothalamus, to the pituitary, where levels are off, which is, again, why you may see really high TSH levels. It's like the message is being sent, but things aren't happening, and that inability to convert is interfering with how that body's communicating. So it's a system of systems, and until we begin looking at it that way, we're missing a lot of the parts and pieces of the puzzle.
It's when I say they're made up, I'm not saying people don't have symptoms, but you have cancer, that's a disease, right? You have AIDS, that's a disease. SIBO, that's not a disease. It's made up. You have a bacterial overgrowth, but it's been shown, and I've quoted this many times by people in research, that bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine is caused by hypothyroidism. And bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine is caused by the fermentation of starches and creates a bacterial overgrowth. So it's how we're living and eating that's creating the candida response. That's creating, quote unquote, the adrenal fatigue, which is chronic blood sugar dysregulation. But it puts fear in people's eyes. And next thing you know, they're walking around with all these disorders, and they want to do labs and labs and labs to treat them. It just doesn't work. From our perspective, it does not work, because you're trying to treat a symptom.
Yeah.
And, when people have digestive issues, look up 100 diseases. I guarantee in 100 diseases, you're going to find a digestive issue. So how can you say it's just SIBO? So we really want to get people away from that.
And the only reason we say that is because over the last week, we've probably had
everyone that calls us
people.
has SIBO. You know, like an epidemic right now. I almost called the CDC. I mean, it's insane. You know, but I'm not denying that people. It's like, why does a layperson say they have SIBO? I mean, come on.
And, you know, and I think, again, that's why we do what it is we're doing and why we're having this conversation in the first place, so we can begin to help people look at things a little bit differently, you know, and go a little bit broader with what's happening in their body versus just so focused. And, you know, again, over time, it's creating that anxiety, and people are no longer able to see the forest for the trees, you know, because they've been so focused in on one spot.
A client said that to me yesterday. She's local. We were chatting. She's in her 50s. And she's so excited for every consult because it's the first time in like 55 years she's found something that's really worked for her. We're not using any supplements, just food. And she struggled tremendously with like depression and no energy and, you know, SIBO and hypothyroidism, you know. And we were talking about yesterday because I always ask clients like every week for 2 things they've learned about themselves through the process. And it could be anything. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. And she's like, I'm learning that I'm focusing so much on my symptoms instead of a lot of the positive things that I'm doing. You know, and I need to remind myself that I need to focus on what's right with me instead of what's wrong with me.
Exactly.
And I said, that's a huge revelation. Most people can't even think like that, you know, and you always say something.
One of my teachers once said to me, and I absolutely love it, is there's nothing wrong with you that what's right with you can't fix. And, you know, again, it's just kind of embodies everything that it is we're doing here, because we're really working with the health. We're working with how the body is communicating itself. And as I mentioned earlier, we're teaching people how to meet the body where it is and give it the support it needs so it can move into that next transitional piece of healing that it needs to go to, you know, and you know, and then you just continuously see these transitions that people go through, and that's those stepping stones of that healing process that are just completely transformational, not only physically in what they're experiencing in their body, but it really is connecting. And I don't want to go, you know, here, but that mind, body, and spirit as one.
Yeah.
You know, people are really able to come into themselves as they begin to resource themselves and reestablish that core foundation.
Yes.
And I would say for me, the way that I'm doing that a lot with people is getting away from the fear. And I think what you were saying about the lab test is 100% correct. And people are kind of wanting or are finding that they've become their diagnosis, or they are sort of, instead of being an individual, I am sort of underthyroid or underactive thyroid, or I have SIBO, and that's who I am, is in terms of kind of like their identity. And starting to get people to stop kind of fearing kind of food and their body, to start to move into being able to be healthy. And there was a great article that I read yesterday about sort of digestive issues and inflammation and SIBO, and how kind of the stress about, am I eating the right foods, and am I doing the right things, is in a lot of ways what drives that. And so people's worry about food is the thing that then causes them to be unable to digest that food. And it's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel, again, unless we can begin to show them directly, that we're going to continue to see that vicious process of people just, you know, so fearful.
And that goes back to what we say to our clients a lot with the labs, and exactly what you just said is everyone's trying to become so healthy that they're turning the journey of health into unhealthy, dysfunction, and it becomes too obsessive. And they're trying to be perfect in this very imperfect world, and that stress of that, like you said, is going to exacerbate the process. So now you're really not becoming healthy anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm always kind of sort of, when I'm starting out with clients, and it's the people who find their way to me are the kind of the health conscious people. They're people who are doing the things that they've been told to be doing. It's not someone who's eating Subway and McDonald's and sort of processed foods. They're people who are eating tons of steamed vegetables and kale and quinoa, and like doing the things that they believe they should be doing to be healthy. And I'm always saying, like, your pursuit of health is kind of why you're now getting in contact with me, because you're doing the things that you're trying to be healthy and you're being so kind of tough on yourself, and it's led you to this place. And I'm always trying to get people to kind of relax around food because and I know it seems weird because to like have a nutritionist saying that you need to chill out, you need to kind of be sort of more relaxed around what you're eating, but it really is the truth.
It's a conversation that we have with our clients all the time. I recently started with a woman who, by our second consultation, she was going crazy. She was just resentful and angry. And I'm like, well, what? I feel like the limitations that we place on ourselves are because, we're doing that. It's not. And so you really have to have the conversation that, health is not a black and white process. There's so many gray areas, and to lighten up on yourself. And just because these are foundational pieces that we're putting into place here, it doesn't mean that you take that information and become so rigid with it. You are a human being that has very specific needs. And again, sometimes, when you want to go out with your children and you're feeling a little tired and you want to go to the ocean, but you think you should rest because you've been told to kind of take it easy on yourself. They're just, you really have to be specific and have those conversations with them so that they can, you have to give them permission. Yeah. Because they haven't had that permission in a long time. They've had a very obscured way of looking at what health is supposed to be, and very, again, that rigidity that you were just speaking of that's not what it is. It's finding a balance and to support, what your body is telling you. If you feel emotionally that you need to go there, then go there. It's going to do you much more service than restricting yourself, which again, like we were talking about earlier, is only going to perpetuate that stress cycle, Yeah. So yes, we have those conversations with our clients on a regular basis because we have become so black and white about what health is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think from my perspective, again, the idea of health has become an aesthetic as opposed to like true health. And I know from kind of following you guys and your courses, etc., that you are wanting to kind of create health from sort of inside out as opposed to just the appearance of health, which unfortunately is what so many people are now promoting these days.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, I had this conversation with another client yesterday, a great client of mine, and she's in her 30s, and we were talking about health, and I said, well, what is your definition of health?
Yeah.
And that's one thing we want to get clear with people is you have to create that definition. When we work with people, we're not trying to turn them into us. We teach them a philosophy, and the picture that they paint is their interpretation of the philosophy, and it's the interpretation that's going to work for their lifestyle. And she said, I'm acknowledging that possibly this is exactly where I need to be in my life. And maybe where I am weight-wise is exactly how I'm supposed to be. And maybe that's my definition of health. I don't know yet, but I always thought my definition of health was I was going to be 36, a mom, and the skinny hut model. But I'm realizing I'm comparing myself to other people and what their definition of health is. So it comes down to your definition of health. It doesn't have to be weight. It could be responsibility. It could be anything, So I think people need to define their definition of health, because if you don't, you're going to compare yourself to other people's definitions and you're never going to be good enough.
Yeah.
So
we kind of all have a real common interest in Ray Peat. I'm kind of completely fascinated by the guy and his work, and I know you have both taken it sort of much deeper than I have. Tell me when you kind of first came across his work, and for kind of those who are unfamiliar with who he is, kind of a bit of a insight into his ideas, etc.
Well, in 2000, it's like maybe 2002, 3 or 4, I was at a truck stop.
This is always an interesting way to start a story.
I'm just kidding. I was at a nutrition certification, and at the time, and the organizer was mentioning references, and she kept talking about Ray Peat. So I was like, okay, I got to check this guy out. And I checked him out, when I got home, and everything he wrote about conflicted with everything that I learned and what I was teaching everyone.
Yeah.
So it kind of rattled my foundation big time. But But I'm not the type of person that's going to be like, okay, like I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Like, to me, it was very intriguing. And at the time, I kind of studied his work to the point that I could and understand it, because I think to study Ray's work, you have to have a deep understanding of how the body works. Because if you don't, this is a little bit obnoxious, you're going to really misinterpret it. So you need a deep base of physiology to understand his work. So I only really took away what I could. And I used it with people minus the whole, unsaturated fat thing, because it didn't really make sense to me at that point. And incorporated it with my work to a small degree. But that's how I was really introduced to it, and then over the years studied it more and more and studied physiology more and more and understood it more and more. So it really resonated with me. And the main reason it resonates with me is because he focuses on function of the body. He focuses on balance within the body. I know a lot of people misinterpret it incorrectly, but, cortisol isn't bad or estrogen isn't bad. It's the balance of estrogen to progesterone that's important, So he's all about finding the balance of these things through using food. And I know a lot of people think he's about, you need to take T3 and you need to take pregnenolone and K2 and calcium and vitamin E and eggshell calcium and aspirin, and I can't even go on. And that's Ray Peat. That's not Ray Peat. I've asked him specifically about when he talks about DHEA or a pregnenolone, is he referring to the supplement or is he referring to like something else? And he's saying, in a sense, if we eat the right foods, we can increase our body's own production, and that the production of it has been shown to help with A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
Do or should you use a supplement here and there if it's needed? For sure. But I can tell you that the food works way better. And if you try to use the food over the supplements, you're going to get much better result. So that's kind of how I got introduced to him. It was through a nutrition certification, really. Yeah. And, we've studied his work. I mean, we used to read a ton of his articles, and I think, it's interesting. It's almost like when you get to a point and you understand his work, when you read one article, you've read them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they all have the same premise per se, and it's really about working with the body and creating balance, with, hormones or biochemistry through, increasing the saturated to unsaturated fat ratio, using fruits and roots and using non-inflammatory proteins. And, I'm obviously summarizing it, but
I think you really connected those dots for us as far as food and human physiology and the relationships.
Right.
And, when we first started studying Ray's work, we applied it. And, we had been doing we've gone down the different paths of nutritional approaches, not only for ourselves, but again, how we have applied it with clients. And, for me, having been in such a hypothyroid state, which again, this is a lot of Ray's focus, it began to change my life, just through eating foods. And it wasn't always pretty because, again, interpreting his work can be a little confusing. Yeah. So I've been down the path, I was kind of my own guinea pig. But when you begin to see how profound the results are, it's just a no-brainer. It just pulls all those pieces of the puzzle that we've been looking for together, and really looking at that wholeness of, again, the systems and how they're communicating.
I mean,
we can step outside of trying to fix things, right, and just work with that. And over time, the body it already knows how to do that. So we can just give it what it needs through identifying, through the assessments and whatnot, and set the foundation.
I mean, years ago when we were really deep into reading his articles, we wanted to mentor with him, but he's definitely an introvert, and he doesn't really do a lot of consulting anymore. So hey, why don't we just create a blog talk radio show, interview him and see if he wants to be interviewed, and then we can learn from him and so can everyone else. And that's kind of what we did. Is we interviewed him and we learned more, and they're on our blog talk radio show, and and then through correspondence, through email, we've talked to him, not so much in the past year or two, but before that, a tremendous amount. And I think his work is pretty profound. I think a lot of people don't understand it, and that's why they poo-poo it. And I think a lot of people misinterpret it, and that's why people poo-poo it. But I think if you really take the time to sit down and read it, it actually makes more sense than anything I've ever read.
Yeah, and I would agree that I had a very similar experience when I first got exposed to his stuff. I remember reading it and just thinking, this goes against basically everything I've been taught about kind of the more important things in terms of health, like everyone needs to be having fish oils and that carbohydrates are bad and yada, yada, yada. And look, he doesn't write in the easiest way for a layperson to understand. And I think it does take a long time to start to put together the pieces of everything he's talking about. But as you said, once you get to that place, you can read kind of one article and it just sums up his philosophy on everything. And my take on his work is I think of it more as a philosophy instead of like really hard and fast, okay, he says that you should be having this amount of sugar or that you have to have this amount of coffee or whatever it may be, and just a real philosophy with things. And one of the big parts that he says kind of repeatedly that really stands out for me is just that with cells and the way that the body works, that sort of it's interdependent between sort of energy and structure. And what that really means is that for cells to work properly, they have to be producing adequate amounts of energy so that their structure can actually work properly. And I think there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding if we go back to that sort of metabolism idea that there is a finite amount of metabolism or a finite amount of energy that the human body produces. And so if you can slow down how the body produces, you're going to extend your life or some other thoughts along those lines. And really what he shows is that's actually not correct. And that the more you're slowing down things by impacting on thyroid or impacting on cells and metabolism, the more that you're then bringing upon the body dysfunction because it's not able to keep that structure and function going.
Right.
Exactly.
And so about sort of 3 years ago, I took your metabolic blueprint program, and it's still sort of hands down one of the best things I've ever done as a practitioner. And I learned so much from the program, and I use like a lot of it with sort of nearly every client. And one of the big things I got from you guys was just the real focus on food logs, on sort of looking at how often people are eating and the ratios and that side of things. And in a time when sort of most practitioners focus so much on supplements with a bit of nutritional guidelines, you're doing the opposite. And it's how I practice as well, where it's a big focus on food and very little focus on supplements. And so is this the way that you guys always practice? And if not, like, how did you get to that place?
Well, it's definitely not the way we've always practiced. We were doing a lot of labs and supplements at one point. And again, just I think during that time, we were also studying Ray's work, and the labs and supplements were doing a lot of what we were just explaining as far as qualifying people as their labs and, you know, treating symptoms and not really working with the people. But even at that time, we were using nutrition. We were actually having people food log and talk to them about nutrition, but we were understanding it in a very different way. So again, as we began to really dive into Ray's work and how we were applying nutrition, we, began to step away from using those labs and coming more into relationship with the person. And
I think one of the biggest things was, we were using labs to the point where we're individualizing it. We weren't doing like every lab with every person, and we weren't even doing labs with some people, but the problem was we were getting clients from all over the world, and they were coming to us with stacks of labs already done. Right. So how could we do more labs with people that did labs that didn't work and took supplement protocols? So, and that was when we were deep in Ray's work, and that's when we really started to say the one thing we feel people are missing is that nutritional component. Yeah. And that's where we really started to, create our philosophy based on the interpretation of Ray's work and Broda Barnes and other people, and start to use it on ourselves and clients, and found that it actually worked 10 times better than the supplements in the labs. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging for people to wrap their head around because they're like, I eat healthy, or, how is food going to heal me? I'm super sick, And the challenging thing is, it's like they say they eat healthy. Like I have a new client and she's like, well, I eat healthy and I have tachycardia. I don't know why. What do you eat? She gives me just some examples, and then I get her food log with her assessments, and it's 2 meals a day, literally no protein, whatever. And of course you're going to have tachycardia. So it's challenging for people to wrap their head around. So, part of it is really explaining it to people. But it's almost like they have to go through the process to really see, what they're not doing.
Well, I think, again, when we are qualifying what this whole definition of health is, and again, obviously, we all have a very different view on it. But, again, as you said, Chris, people are eating healthy, what their idea of healthy is. But when we begin to look at what our idea of healthy is from a cellular standpoint, if you can't break down the food that you're eating, which most people, when they are in a deficient state, cannot, that food no longer becomes healthy for you, right? So it's really helping them to make that connection and build from that point of view. And I know I had another point, but I just lost it.
Well, it's simple. It doesn't matter if you have a disease or not. We're all human. We need food, water, and air to survive. So it doesn't matter what disease you have or if you're working with a doctor. What we do can help anyone. Whether it's going to help to fix or cure you because you just have blood sugar issues, for sure. Or, I have some clients that have cancer and I'm working with them. Is it going to cure cancer? Definitely not. But if they want to work with me to support their body, to support everything else they're doing, is it a great win-win situation for them? 100%. I think a lot of people are so nowadays are looking for the next best thing for skin therapy, for a treatment of this, for their digestive system, for a supplement, for a cleanse, which is absolutely ridiculous. And they're getting further and further away from the one thing that humans need to survive is food.
Yeah.
It's like we always say, when you're an infant or a baby, what do you need to thrive and grow and repair? Food. And if you don't feed a baby, what's going to happen? They're going to get fussy, irritability, etc.
But I think that's one of the big reasons, that food isn't working for people. And this is what I was going towards is that it depends on where you come in on that metabolic spectrum and how you choose your foods and the way in which you're using your foods. And that's what we're doing differently with people here is we're looking at what their bodies are expressing. And we are teaching them how to nourish their body back to health based on what their body can metabolize. Because, again, when we go back to what metabolism is and food and energy and vitamins and minerals, those are the catalyst to every single reaction in our body. And we know that under those chronic situations, we become very deficient. So we have to find how are we going to resource this individual. And again, that's going to come back to where they fall on that spectrum, because then we can begin to understand what's going on digestively, what's going on hormonally, and give it the tools.
Right, and it's looking at the types of foods people are eating. A lot of people are eating food that is really non-digestible by humans, and a lot of people think just because a food's a food that I should eat it, or because this guy says I should eat beans because he's vegan and it actually helped him. And people don't understand, like, we're studying the physiology of food. And there's a lot of foods that people can't break down. So you might be healthy because you're eating healthy foods, but if you're not eating the right foods or the right amounts to meet your body's needs or in the right food frequency, you're not going to create energy at the cell level. And we did a video on this on YouTube. It's called Are You Healthy? It's basically, we don't need to argue with you. Just take your body temperature and pulse when you wake up in bed. If it's below the norm, then how you're living and how you're eating, no matter how healthy it is you think it is, it's not working to feed your metabolism. It's just keeping you alive.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I'm always talking to people about is like where they're currently at and what is working for them, like in reality, as opposed to like thinking about things that they've read online as healthy, or thinking about things in absolute terms, in the sense that there might be foods that you can't eat at this stage, but in 3 months' time, once you've done some repair work, you can. And so starting to kind of really think about health based on the reactions that you're getting in your body, not some kind of fantasy or some sort of arbitrary diet that you've read in a book or online. But I would also add to this, like, just in regards to kind of the original question, like, I find, like, as a practitioner, I use food logs so much with people, and I use sort of analyzing that and talking to them about it and getting them to understand why certain things are going on to really make improvements. And I find, or I believe, or I can't quite understand how other practitioners can be working and getting results without this kind of information. Because when you say to someone like, oh, what did you eat for last week? They can rattle off a whole heap of things like, oh, I'm starting to eat more fish, or I'm starting to do more of this. But you then look at it in a food log and you're like, well, okay, maybe that's not the case. Or yes, you are eating more of those foods. But if you notice that there's like a 5-hour gap between you waking up and you actually having breakfast, and unless you're actually getting someone to put that stuff in black and white, then you're not going to pick up on it. And look, food logs don't work for everyone. And I work a lot with people who have eating disorders. And in that realm, maybe it's not going to be appropriate if it's going to cause more anxiety and stress. But I would say for the majority of the time when you're working sort of purely from a health perspective, it really baffles me how people can do this without a food log.
It baffles us too, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's our process. I mean, we require our clients to email us in between consults with many things, but they have to send their food logs every week. And if I don't have a food log, we don't have a consult, because A, it's their journey, and B, I need to know what's going on to be able to support them and guide them. And it's more than just the food. I always tell people the foundation is the type of food. But we take it a lot further with the food frequency, the ratios of grams of calories at each meal at the end of the day to make sure you're meeting your body's needs and looking at how you feel and body temperature and pulse. So there's a lot of things going on. People can learn a lot about themselves in their body and what's working and not working from these logs. It's a feedback mechanism. So I agree 100%. A lot of people out there will say that, I don't want to use any specific terms, but they eat according to Ray's philosophy. And I always tell people, Ray has a philosophy, but he's not a nutritionist. He doesn't have a nutrition guide. It's everyone's interpretation. And you have all these people overdosing on sugar, or overdosing on this, or underdosing on protein. And I always say to people, log what you're doing. And if you're not logging it, you really have no idea if it's going to work or not. And if you'd be amazed if you logged it, how chaotic what you're taking in is, because it's so out of balance. It doesn't matter that you're eating a carrot or that you're having gelatin. It's about balance. Like I said, his whole philosophy is about balance. And you're only going to see that through a log.
Yeah. And look, I'm always very upfront with people about what I want them to use the log for, because I think a lot of people have used food logs in the past, but as a way of making sure they're not eating kind of too many calories and kind of restricting and using it from that perspective. And I'm like, that's not what I'm doing with you. Like, you're going to probably discover I'm going to tell you to eat a lot more food, not the other way around. The reason you're keeping it is so you can become in tune with your body. Like, that's the whole point of it. It's not a tool to kind of chastise yourself with.
Exactly. You have to really have that conversation and help people understand what it is they're doing. And in the end, we're really empowering them. We're giving them back the power to support their health in the way that it needs to be. But, again, I love the logs because, again, what we're doing differently here is not do X, Y, and Z, and this is what's going to happen. Yep. We have to, again, look at what your body's showing us, help you to understand that, and then make the appropriate changes or modifications or whatever it is we need to do, but also when people do have a symptom or experience something, wrong in their body on a certain day, they tend to begin to get so focused in on a specific food.
Yeah.
And it allows us to, we require 3 consecutive days because we will look at how each day is affecting the next and bring them back into relationship with what was going on yesterday. And also looking at the whole picture. It's not always about food. Yeah. Food is very, very, very effective in helping to restore the body's function, but there's so many other parts and pieces to who we are. And if we're not willing to look at those parts and pieces, or we're just completely out of relationship with them, again, we're missing big pieces to the puzzle. So it really helps to paint that picture. And I always tell my clients, like, we're kind of working as detectives here together to have these conversations about, what's happening here, so we can get a better sense of it. And, I love resources. So you'll hear me say it a million times, but develop resources that are going to be in support of that individual.
Yeah. And I would say, as part of that, like what you just said there, like, food is not like the be all and end all. And I often say to clients, like, food is only going to get you so far. And so, yes, we can focus on it, we can do our best with it, but a lot of times that's not your bottleneck. That's not the problem. And we can help in that way, but it will only get you to certain points, because actually you need to be going to bed earlier. You need to be working on your relationship. You need to be changing your job, whatever it may be.
Right.
Yeah, it's one piece to that person's healing puzzle.
And it's a big piece, but it's not the only piece. But I also feel that in my experience, in my own personal experience, the more you can begin to use that as, again, restoring that foundation, the more ability people are going to be able to have to look at all the other pieces.
Totally. Because the more you're well-fed, well-nourished, well-rested, the more you're on the even keel and not kind of flying off the handlebars for kind of every small thing. So you can start to be able to look out and deal with things on a much better level.
100%. And I think the awareness and consciousness that this type of approach brings is... I don't know. It has the potential to really change the world.
No, nice. Aim big.
Yeah.
So, Josh, I know you studied a lot in terms of like osteopathy and looking at sort of structure. I mean, how does this impact on you from a nutritional perspective or with nutritional clients, or is this only stuff that you really use from a manual perspective?
Osteopathy in its true form from the 1800s is not what they teach in the U.S. In the U.S., I'm sorry, it's completely bastardized. You're just basically a doctor with a different title. And that's why I go to Canada to study osteopathy. It's in its true form. It's a manual-based therapy, meaning client lays on the table, you work on them. But it's different because it encompasses the whole being. And it's not about being a technician. It's about understanding how the body works and function. There's different principles, but it's understanding how the body works and function, like from the organs to the fascia to the muscles, ligaments, arteries, veins, nerves, energetic level, et cetera, and how they work independently and interdependently. Like, how does the spleen work? Right? How does it move? How does it breathe? What is it attached to? What can it affect? Above and below, etc. So it's really understanding the body and how it works physiologically in balance. And through that understanding, you're actually the student. So you assess your client, not looking for anything. You assess based on, I'll simplify it, like, what's the vitality of something, what's the position of something, and how is that something moving per se. And if something's off, how it's not moving or how it's not breathing. And the body's going to tell you exactly what needs to be done. So it's not like you go in with, of course, it's techniques, but you don't go in saying, client comes in and says, I have a knee problem. Okay, let me do techniques on your knee, right? That's a technician. That's basically how most therapists work. Osteopathy is different. It's understanding how the body works, assessing it, and treating what you find. And basically, it's through listening, and it's the body telling you exactly what you need to treat. I might not even touch the knee, right? Because I find that it's, the cecum or, cecum on the, iliac artery that's causing knee issues or whatever. So it's really listening to the body and working with the balance of the body, and you're actually the student, and the body is actually the teacher. And that's what we're doing with our nutrition.
It's the exact same thing. And that's why we've both been so attracted to these practices.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't talk nutrition with my osteopathy clients. They come in and they want to buy apples, and I sell them apples. Back in the day, it used to be like, oh, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do it all. And, you know, one of my old mentors, you know, it's almost like people come to you and you're a notch on their healing ladder. You don't need to give them everything in the kitchen sink. If they came to me for osteopathy, I'll give them osteopathy. You know, if they want to learn about nutrition, they'll ask me about nutrition. You know, just like my nutrition clients, you know, they come to me for nutrition. If they want osteopathy, they might ask about manual therapy. I'm not going to try to sell everyone on it, you know. So I kind of keep it separate, but the philosophy is the same, you know. I might bring up a couple things here and there, but, you know, it's really working with the body, working with the function of the body, the physiology of the body, understanding the interrelationships of the body, and listening to it through understanding function. And through that, you know, you basically create a plan based on what the body's telling you.
You let it guide you.
And you let it guide you. And that's what we do nutritionally, and that's what we do with our osteopathy. And, you know, osteopathy is it's challenging for people to wrap their head around because it's not aggressive. You know, it's like you go see an ART therapist or a chiropractor, you know you're getting worked on, right?
Yeah.
Because it hurts like a son of a bitch. And, you know, my take is, you know, it's like if someone's pushing that hard on you and they say they're working on the fascia, I got news for you. They're working like within the bone. They're pressing so deep, you know. So osteopathy it's about levels, but it's very subtle, but very powerful. You know, so it's challenging for people to wrap their head around because what I'm feeling or listening to is everything in my hands, you know. So they might not feel like anything's going on, or they might feel like something's going on, but it's very subtle, but it's very powerful. But it's the same, it aligns 100% with what we're doing nutritionally. You know, it's helping people create that awareness of what's going on.
Cool. And look, I know personally I've recommended clients go and see an osteopath a number of times, and it's normally at the point where we're making changes and things are going along, and my sense is that there's something that's going on that's more structural than nutrition is just going to resolve. And it's like if you can go and see someone and they can do something manually and they can understand how the alignment of your back is linking into your spleen or whatever it may be, they can then deal with that in a way that I'm not going to be able to do from a nutritional perspective.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
And that comes to just having, again... You know your clients and you understand their history. You understand every part of where they've been. You know, when we assess our clients, it's from womb to present moment. So we have an idea of all the parts of their story. So, you know, we'll get to a certain point and very often we have to refer them out to, you know, other specialists, whether it be an osteopath, cranial sacral therapist, whatever it may be,
sure,
that's going to support, again, that healing process, because we're not going to be the end-all, be-all, you know?
But it's, you know, osteopathy is, it's not all structural, you know? Yeah. Because...
Well, it's very interrelated to, physiologically.
Yeah, physiologically. I mean, you would talk to any of my teachers and they'd be like, oh, you have Hashimoto's, and they'll be able to treat people out of Hashimoto's, you know, or, you know, whatever it may be. So it's you know, working with the body with your hands. But it can be very powerful if someone needs it, you know. Yeah.
And so if people are wanting to find out more about you guys, where should they be going?
eastwesthealing.com.
Okay, perfect. And do you guys have, I know I've done the Metabolic Blueprint program with you before. Do you have, like, that's still available? And do you have other programs that people can take if they so wish?
Yeah, if you go to our website, eastwesthealing.com, there's a tab that says e-courses. So it has our Metabolic Blueprint and our Fight Fatigue with Food program. They're both online e-courses. You can check them out. There's an ebooks tab, so it has our downloadable cookbook that you can, you know, purchase, or it has our, you know, books that we have on Amazon. So everything you need is on our site. You know, it's pretty easy to navigate.
Yeah, but our Metabolic Blueprint, just so people know, is an educational course, but our Fight Fatigue with Food is something that we designed very similar to how we work with our one-on-one clients. It's just, again, doesn't have that one-on-one component, but it allows you to work through those different steps of how to set that foundation and understand, logs and so on and so forth. So it can be a very useful tool for people who are looking to get the process started.
Right.
Something different. Yeah.
Well, look, it's been lovely chatting to you both. I know you've both had a real impact on the way I practice as a practitioner. And so, yeah, it's been great to chat with you both.
Yeah, you too, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.